The train station smelled like burnt coffee and diesel fuel. Rebecca stood on the platform with her single suitcase, watching families say goodbye to each other. Mothers hugged their children. Couples kissed like they might never see each other again. She had no one to say goodbye to. That was exactly why she was here. The announcement crackled through the speakers. Chicago to Seattle. 3 days of rolling landscapes and strangers. 3 days to figure out what came next. Or maybe just 3 days to run away. She wasn't sure which one it was yet. At 34 years old, Rebecca felt like she'd woken up in someone else's life. 3 weeks ago, she'd had a job at an accounting firm. Not her dream job, but it paid the bills. 2 months ago, she'd had a boyfriend named David who talked about marriage but never quite got around to asking. 6 months ago, her apartment had felt like home instead of just a place where she kept her stuff. Now she had nothing but a suitcase and a one-way ticket to a city she'd never visited. The train doors opened with a hiss. Rebecca climbed aboard, dragging her suitcase behind her. The car was half empty. Good. She wanted to be alone. She found a window seat and settled in, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. "Excuse me, dear. Is this seat taken?" Rebecca looked up. An older woman stood in the aisle, probably in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a loose bun. She wore a purple cardigan despite the warm September weather, and she carried a leather bag that looked older than Rebecca herself. "No, it's free," Rebecca said, trying to keep the disappointment out of her voice. "So much for being alone." The woman sat down with a soft sigh, the kind that comes after a long day. She arranged her bag carefully on her lap, then turned to Rebecca with a smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you. I'm Dorothy, by the way." "Rebecca. Lovely to meet you, Rebecca. Heading to Seattle?" "That's the plan." Dorothy nodded, seeming to understand that Rebecca wasn't in a chatty mood. The train lurched forward and the station began to slip away. Rebecca watched the city transform from buildings to suburbs to open fields. She'd lived in Chicago her whole life. Now she was leaving, and she wasn't sure she'd ever come back. For the first hour, they sat in comfortable silence. Dorothy pulled out a worn leather journal and began writing. Not typing on a phone or tablet, but actually writing with a pen. Rebecca couldn't remember the last time she'd seen someone do that. The rhythm of the pen-scratching paper was oddly soothing. Rebecca felt her shoulders relax for the first time in weeks. She didn't have to talk. Didn't have to explain herself. She could just sit here and watch the world go by. "First time on a long train ride?" Dorothy asked eventually, not looking up from her journal. "Yeah, I usually fly if I need to go anywhere." "Oh, you're missing out then. Trains give you time to think. Planes rush you from one place to another. Trains let you exist in between." Rebecca considered that. "In between sounds about right for where I am." Dorothy smiled and closed her journal. "In between jobs? In between relationships? In between versions of yourself?" "All of the above." The words came out before Rebecca could stop them. She wasn't the type to open up to strangers, but something about Dorothy made it feel safe. "Been there," Dorothy said simply. "Many times, actually." The lunch cart came by and Dorothy ordered tea. Rebecca got coffee even though the station smell had been accurate. It tasted burnt. She drank it anyway. "What takes you to Seattle?" Dorothy asked. "Honestly, I don't know. I just needed to go somewhere different. Running away or running toward?" Rebecca laughed, but it came out bitter. "Is there a difference?" "Oh, absolutely. Running away, you're trying to escape something. Running toward, you're chasing something. Most people think they're the same, but they're not. The energy is completely different. Then I guess I'm running away." Dorothy sipped her tea. "What are you running from?" Rebecca stared out the window. Fields of corn stretched endlessly in every direction. A life that stopped fitting. You ever feel like you're wearing clothes that are too small? Like every move you make, something pinches or pulls in the wrong way? More times than I can count. That's how my whole life felt. My job made me tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. My relationship was comfortable but empty. My apartment, my friends, my routine, everything was fine on paper. But I felt like I was slowly disappearing. Dorothy nodded like she understood completely. "So you left. So I left. Quit my job over email. Broke up with David over the phone. Gave away most of my furniture. Packed what I cared about into storage. And bought a ticket on this train." "What did David say?" "He asked if I was having a mental breakdown." Rebecca laughed, but tears pricked her eyes. "Maybe I am. I don't know anymore." Normal people don't just blow up their lives, right? They stick with the plan. They make it work. Normal is overrated, Dorothy said quietly. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit when something isn't working. They fell into silence again, but this time it felt different. Less lonely. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything gold. Rebecca watched the shadows stretch across the fields. Can I ask you something? Dorothy said after a while. Sure. When did you last feel excited about your life? Rebecca opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. When had she last felt excited? She scrolled back through her memories like flipping through old photographs. Last year? 2 years ago? Further? I don't remember, she finally admitted. Isn't that terrible? I can't remember the last time I woke up and actually wanted to start the day. It's not terrible. It's honest. And honesty is the first step. First step to what? To finding your way back to yourself. Rebecca wanted to ask what that meant, but a family with 3 loud children claimed the seats across the aisle. The moment shifted. Dorothy returned to her journal, and Rebecca pulled out her phone, scrolling mindlessly through social media. Everyone else's life looked so put together, so purposeful. As evening fell, the train made a stop in Wisconsin. People got off. New people got on. The world kept moving while Rebecca sat still. Dorothy ordered dinner from the dining car. Rebecca wasn't hungry, but Dorothy insisted she eat something. They shared a table in the dining car with 2 other passengers who talked about fishing. Rebecca pushed food around her plate and wondered what she was doing. Back at their seats, the lights dimmed. Other passengers settled in for the night. Dorothy pulled a blanket from her bag and tucked it around herself. Rebecca, she said softly, I know we just met, and I know you didn't ask for advice. But can I tell you something? Okay, you're not running away. You're running toward. You just don't know what yet, and that's okay. The not knowing is part of it. Rebecca felt tears slide down her cheeks. She quickly wiped them away. How do you know? Because I did the same thing. 30 years ago, I sat right here in this seat, running from a life that didn't fit anymore, and a stranger sat beside me and changed everything. What did they say? Dorothy smiled. You'll find out. Get some rest. We have 2 more days together. Rebecca pulled out her earbuds but didn't put them in. She watched the darkness outside the window, broken occasionally by distant house lights. Somewhere out there, people were living their normal lives, going to bed in homes they loved, waking up to jobs that fulfilled them. Or maybe not. Maybe everyone was just pretending, just like she had been. The train rocked gently, a lullaby of steel and motion. Rebecca's eyes grew heavy. Just before she drifted off, she felt Dorothy pat her hand once, gentle and reassuring. Tomorrow, everything would look different. She just had to trust that different might be better. Rebecca woke to sunlight streaming through the train window. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the gentle rocking brought it all back. The train. Dorothy. Running away or running toward. Dorothy was already awake, sipping tea from a thermos and looking out at the passing landscape. Mountains rose in the distance now, their peaks still dusted with early snow. Good morning, Dorothy said. We're in Montana. Montana. Rebecca sat up, rubbing her neck. Sleeping in a train seat wasn't exactly comfortable. I've never been to Montana. It's beautiful, isn't it? All that open space makes you feel small and significant at the same time. Rebecca looked out at the endless rolling hills. Dorothy was right. There was something about all that emptiness that made her chest feel both tight and free. You want some tea? I always bring extra. Sure. Thank you. Dorothy poured tea into a small cup and handed it to Rebecca. It was still hot, fragrant with something that smelled like honey and herbs. What kind is this? My own blend. I make it myself. Chamomile, lavender, a bit of mint. It's good for transitions, and transitions? Moving from one phase of life to another. It helps settle the nerves. Rebecca sipped the tea. It did help, actually. Warm and calming. She watched the landscape change as they traveled deeper into Montana. Small towns appeared and disappeared. Lonely gas stations. Abandoned barns. Tell me about yourself, Dorothy said. Where did you grow up? Small town in Indiana, Riverside. Population 3,000 on a good day. Did you like it there? Rebecca thought about that. I don't know. It was home, you know. I didn't question it when I was a kid. But when I got older, I felt trapped. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone expected you to stay, get married, work at the factory or the hospital or one of the farms. But you left. For college. Went to Chicago and never moved back. My dad still lives there. He keeps asking when I'm coming home for a visit. I keep making excuses. Dorothy nodded. What did you study? Business. Practical, right? That's what my guidance counselor said. She said I was smart but needed to be realistic. Writers don't make money. Artists starve. So I studied business and got a job at an accounting firm and spent 8 years adding up other people's numbers. You wanted to be a writer? The question hit Rebecca harder than it should have. A long time ago, yeah. In high school, I filled notebooks with stories. My English teacher said I had talent, said I should pursue it, but everyone else said it was a waste of time. And you listened to everyone else, and wouldn't you? My mom died when I was 16. Dad was working 2 jobs to keep our house. I couldn't be the selfish kid who ran off to chase dreams while he struggled. Dorothy's expression softened. When did your mother pass? December of my sophomore year. Car accident. Black ice, I'm so sorry. They sat in silence for a moment. Rebecca hadn't talked about her mother in years. People always got uncomfortable when she brought it up, so she'd learned to keep it inside. I lost my mother young too, Dorothy said quietly. I was 19, cancer. Rebecca looked at her in surprise. Really? Really? It changes you, doesn't it? Losing your mother when you're still figuring out who you are? Yeah. I felt like I lost my instruction manual. Dad did his best, but he didn't know how to talk about feelings. We just sort of existed around the grief instead of dealing with it. That's common, especially for that generation of men. The breakfast cart came by and they ordered food. Eggs and toast for Rebecca. Oatmeal for Dorothy. They ate in comfortable silence, watching the world roll by. So you studied business, Dorothy said eventually. Then what? Then I got the job. Started dating David. Got promoted once or twice. Moved into a better apartment. Did all the things you're supposed to do. And somewhere along the way I stopped writing completely. Why? Rebecca shrugged. No time, too tired. What was the point? That's what I told myself anyway. But the truth is, I think I was afraid. Afraid of what? That I wasn't actually good at it. That my English teacher was just being nice. That I'd try and fail and then I wouldn't even have the dream anymore. At least if I didn't try, I could still imagine I might have been good. Dorothy smiled sadly. Oh, Rebecca. I know that fear very well. You do? Of course. I think everyone does. The fear that we're not who we think we are. That our dreams are bigger than our abilities. So we convince ourselves we don't want them anyway. Did you have dreams like that? Dorothy laughed. Oh yes. I wanted to be a photographer. I had this old camera my grandfather gave me. I used to take pictures of everything. Light through windows. Strangers on streets. Rain on pavement. I loved finding beauty in ordinary things. Why didn't you pursue it? Same reasons as you, I imagine. Life got in the way. I got engaged young, 22, to a man my father approved of. Stable job, good family. Everything looked right on paper. Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. What happened? I was supposed to marry him when I was 23. But a few months before the wedding, I was looking at wedding dresses and having panic attacks in fitting rooms. Something inside me kept screaming that this was wrong, that I was about to lock myself into a life that would make me disappear. So you called it off? Eventually. But not before I tried to convince myself I was just having cold feet. Normal pre-wedding jitters. I almost went through with it. What stopped you? Dorothy's eyes grew distant. A train ride. Just like this one. I was supposed to be going to Seattle to look at venues for the wedding, but instead I bought a one-way ticket and left everything behind. Rebecca stared at her. You're kidding. I'm not. That's exactly what I did. I know. They looked at each other for a long moment. Rebecca felt goosebumps rise on her arms. What were the odds? What happened after you left? Rebecca asked. Chaos at first. My fiancé was furious. My father stopped speaking to me for 2 years. My friends thought I'd lost my mind. And maybe I had. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I couldn't go through with it. Where did you go? Seattle, actually. Got a job as a waitress. Lived in a tiny studio apartment with 3 other girls. It was terrifying and wonderful. And slowly I started taking pictures again. Did you become a photographer? Dorothy smiled. Not in the way you might think. I never got famous or had gallery shows, but I did make a living from it. Weddings mostly. Portraits, school photos. Nothing glamorous, but it was mine. I was creating something instead of just existing. Rebecca felt tears building behind her eyes. How did you know it was the right choice? I didn't, not for a long time. There were days I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. Days I was so lonely I considered going back. But even on the worst days, I never felt that suffocating feeling I'd had before. That feeling of slowly disappearing. I know that feeling, Rebecca whispered. I know you do. I saw it on your face yesterday. The train slowed as they approached a small town. Rebecca watched people on the platform waiting to board. Regular people living regular lives. Were they happy? Or were they suffocating too? Can I ask you something? Rebecca said, anything. Do you ever regret it? Not marrying that guy, not following the normal path? Dorothy considered the question carefully. Sometimes I wonder what that life would have been like. But regret? No, because I know in my bones that if I'd married him, I would have spent the rest of my life wondering what if, and that's a terrible way to live. What if is a terrible way to live, Rebecca repeated. She'd been living in what ifs for years. What if she'd studied writing? What if she'd been braver? What if she'd listened to her own voice instead of everyone else's? You know what's strange? Dorothy said. I make this train trip every year. Same route, same time of year. Chicago to Seattle. Why? Because this is where my life changed. 30 years ago, I sat in this seat and met someone who helped me see my life clearly. And I decided that if I could help someone else the way I was helped, I would. So every year I take this trip. And every year I meet someone who needs to hear what I have to say. Rebecca felt her heart skip. You're saying you've been waiting for me? Not you specifically, but someone like you. Someone standing at the edge of their own life trying to decide whether to jump. That's incredible. And a little bit spooky, Dorothy laughed. I prefer to think of it as purposeful. We all need guides sometimes. People who've walked the path before us and can say, yes, it's scary, but it's worth it. The train started moving again. Rebecca watched the small town disappear behind them. She thought about all the choices that had led her to this moment. All the small surrenders, all the times she'd chosen safe over true. I don't know if I'm brave enough, she admitted. You're already brave, Dorothy said firmly. You left, didn't you? You walked away from the life that was killing you. That takes enormous courage. It doesn't feel brave. It feels reckless, but bravery often does. They spent the rest of the morning talking. Dorothy shared more stories from her life. The hard years in Seattle. The photography business she built slowly. The community she found. The love she eventually discovered with someone who saw her for who she really was, not who she was supposed to be. And with every story, Rebecca felt something shift inside her. Like pieces of herself she'd buried were starting to wake up. The parts that dreamed. The parts that created. The parts that knew she was meant for something more than adding up numbers in a gray office. As afternoon turned to evening, Dorothy pulled out her journal again. But this time she opened it to a page near the middle. I want to show you something, she said. The page was filled with photographs, small ones carefully arranged. People on trains. Strangers captured in moments of transition. These are people I've met on this trip over the years, Dorothy explained. I take their picture and I write their story. Brief notes about who they were when I met them and what they were searching for. Rebecca looked at the faces. Young and old. Happy and sad. All of them caught in that in-between space, just like her. Why do you do this? To remember. And to remind myself that everyone has a story. Everyone is fighting a battle we can't see. And sometimes all it takes is one conversation to change everything. Dorothy turned the page and Rebecca gasped. The next section was filled with letters. Handwritten notes and emails printed out and carefully pasted into the journal. What are these? Responses. People I've met who wrote to me later, telling me what happened after, how their lives changed, how they found their way. Rebecca read a few of the letters. Each one told a story of transformation. Someone who left an abusive relationship, someone who went back to school, someone who finally had the surgery they'd been afraid to get, someone who moved across the country to be with the person they loved. They all did it, Rebecca said in wonder. They all made the jump. Not all of them, Dorothy said honestly. Some got scared and went back. Some weren't ready, but most found the courage to become who they were meant to be. And even the ones who weren't ready then, many of them found their way later. Rebecca handed the journal back. Her hands were shaking. Do you think I'll find my way? Dorothy looked at her with those kind, knowing eyes. I think you already have. You just don't see it yet. The sun was setting now, painting the Montana sky in shades of orange and pink. Rebecca pressed her face against the window and let the tears come. Not sad tears, something else. Something like relief. She was running toward something. She just didn't know what it was yet. But for the first time in years, she wanted to find out. The third morning on the train brought them into Idaho. The landscape had transformed overnight into something wild and beautiful. Mountains surrounded them on all sides, their peaks touching clouds that looked close enough to grab. Rebecca had barely slept. Her mind kept circling back to everything Dorothy had shared. The photographs, the letters, the idea that one person could change the course of someone's life just by showing up and telling the truth. Dorothy was already awake, as always. This morning she wasn't writing in her journal. Instead, she was looking at Rebecca with an expression that seemed both gentle and determined. "Today's the day," Dorothy said. "The day for what?" "The day I tell you why I really make this trip every year." Rebecca's stomach fluttered. "I thought you already told me. To help people who are in transition, that's part of it, but not all of it." Dorothy poured tea for both of them from her thermos. "There's something I haven't shared yet. Something important." They settled into their seats with the tea. The train car was quiet this morning. Most people were still sleeping or having breakfast in the dining car. 30 years ago, Dorothy began, when I got on this train running from my wedding, I was a mess. Worse than you can probably imagine. I'd left a note for my fiancé. Packed one bag. Emptied my savings account. And I got on the train with no plan except to get as far away as possible. That does sound like a mess. I cried for the first 6 hours. Just sat in this seat and sobbed. People kept asking if I was okay. I kept saying yes, even though I clearly wasn't. What changed? A woman sat down next to me, right where you're sitting now. Her name was Grace. She was in her 60s then, traveling from Chicago to Portland to see her daughter. And instead of ignoring my tears like everyone else, she handed me a tissue and said, "Want to talk about it?" Rebecca smiled. "Like you did with me. Exactly like that." And I told her everything. The whole story just poured out. The engagement I didn't want. The life I was running from. The guilt I felt for disappointing everyone. The fear that I'd just made the worst mistake of my life. What did she say? Dorothy's eyes grew misty. She said, "Honey, you didn't make a mistake. You just made a choice. And choices are scary because they're powerful. They shape our whole lives. That's beautiful." It was exactly what I needed to hear. But she didn't stop there. Grace told me her story too. She'd been married young to a man who seemed perfect. Good job, nice family. But he was cruel behind closed doors. Not physically, but emotionally. He made her feel small, worthless. Like she was lucky he'd chosen her. Rebecca felt a chill. How long was she with him? 20 years? 20 years before she finally left. Her daughter was grown by then. And Grace said those were the best years of her life, even though they came late. Because they were real. They were hers. And she told you this to help you? She told me to show me that everyone has regrets. Everyone has what-ifs. But the biggest regret is staying in a life that makes you disappear. She said, "You're young. You have time to become whoever you're meant to be. Don't waste it being who everyone else needs you to be." Rebecca set down her teacup. Her hands were trembling. "This is why you do this. Because Grace did it for you." Yes, we talked for 2 days straight. She listened to all my fears, helped me see possibilities I couldn't see on my own. And when we reached her stop in Portland, she gave me her address and made me promise to write to her, to let her know how things turned out. Did you write? I did, every few months for 10 years. I told her about my life in Seattle, my photography, the struggles and the victories, and she always wrote back. Always encouraged me. Until one day I got a letter from her daughter saying Grace had passed away. Dorothy's voice caught. She took a moment to compose herself. In that letter, her daughter told me something I never knew. Grace made that same train trip every year, Chicago to Portland, and every year she sat in coach looking for someone who needed what she had once needed, someone to tell them it's okay to choose yourself. Rebecca felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "So you continued it." I had to. Grace had given me my life back. How could I not pass that forward? So for 30 years I've taken this trip, and I've met so many people. Different stories, same struggle. The weight of other people's expectations. The fear of disappointing everyone. The question of whether it's selfish to want your own life. Is it selfish? Dorothy shook her head firmly. No, it's human. We're supposed to grow, to become, to figure out who we are. That's not selfish. That's survival. The train slowed as they approached a station. A few people got off. A few got on, the rhythm of journeys intersecting and diverging. Rebecca, Dorothy said quietly, I need to tell you something else. Something difficult. Okay. This is my last trip. Rebecca's heart sank. What do you mean? I'm 76 years old. My health isn't what it used to be. My daughter has been asking me to stop these trips for years, and I think she's right. It's time. But the people who need you and will find their way, or they won't. I can't carry that responsibility forever. I've done this for 3 decades. I've helped who I could help, and now it's time to let someone else carry it forward. The weight of those words settled over them. Rebecca looked at this woman who had appeared in her life at exactly the right moment. What were the odds? Or maybe it wasn't about odds. Maybe some things were just meant to happen. Why me? Rebecca asked. Why did you choose to tell me all this? Dorothy smiled. I didn't choose you. Life did. You sat down next to me. You were open enough to listen. And I recognized something in you. What did you recognize? Someone who's ready. Not everyone is, you know. Some people need more time, more pain, more convincing. But you already left. You already made the hard choice. You just need someone to tell you it's okay. That you're not crazy. That transformation is supposed to feel scary. Rebecca wiped her eyes. I still don't know what I'm doing. I don't have a plan. I don't even know where I'll live or how I'll pay rent. That's okay. Plans are overrated. I didn't have a plan either. I just had a direction, away from what was killing me, toward what might save me. How did you figure out the next steps? Dorothy laughed. One at a time. That's the only way anyone figures anything out. You make one choice, then another, then another. Some of them work out, some don't. But as long as you keep choosing yourself, you're moving in the right direction. Choosing myself. Rebecca tested the words. They felt foreign. She'd spent so long choosing everyone else. Her father's approval, David's comfort, her boss's expectations. The idea of choosing herself felt radical, revolutionary. I know it sounds simple, Dorothy said, but it's not easy. Choosing yourself means disappointing people. It means saying no when you've always said yes. It means trusting your own voice over everyone else's. What if my own voice is wrong? Then you'll learn something. But at least it will be your mistake. Your lesson. There's dignity in that. They sat in silence for a while. Rebecca watched the landscape change outside the window. They were getting closer to Washington now. Closer to the end of this journey. Closer to whatever came next. Can I ask you something personal? Rebecca said, of course. Do you ever wish you'd stayed? Even for a moment? Do you ever wonder if your life would have been easier if you'd just gone through with the wedding? Dorothy thought carefully before answering. Easier maybe, but easier isn't better. I wouldn't have had my photography. I wouldn't have met my husband, Tom. I wouldn't have had the life I built. Would I have had other things? Sure, children maybe. A bigger house. More stability. But I would have lost myself in the process. And I don't think any of those things would have been worth that price. You sound so certain. I am certain. Because I've lived this life, and even with all its struggles and uncertainties, I've never once felt that suffocating feeling I had when I was engaged. I've been scared. I've been broke. I've been lonely. But I've never felt like I was disappearing. Rebecca nodded. She understood that feeling all too well. The slow fade into nothing. The sense that if she stayed much longer, there would be nothing left of the real her. There's something else I want to give you, Dorothy said. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small wrapped package. What is this? Open it. Rebecca carefully unwrapped the paper. Inside was a journal. Not new, but well-worn. The leather cover was soft from years of handling. Is this Grace's journal? She gave it to me before she died. Her daughter sent it with that last letter. Inside are stories from all the people Grace met on her trips. All the lives she touched. And after Grace passed, I started adding my own stories. All the people I've met over the years. Rebecca opened the journal with reverence. The pages were filled with handwriting. Different styles, different inks. Photographs tucked between pages. Letters folded and pressed flat. 30 years of human connection documented in fading ink. I can't take this, Rebecca whispered. This is your history. Your legacy. Exactly. And now I'm giving it to you, but why? Dorothy took Rebecca's hands. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Because I'm too old to carry this forward. But you're not. You're standing right where I stood 30 years ago. Right where Grace stood 50 years ago. And I believe you're meant to continue this. Continue what exactly? The journey. The tradition. The act of showing up for people who need it. You don't have to do it the same way we did. You don't have to take a train every year. But in whatever way feels right to you, I believe you're meant to help others the way we helped you. Rebecca felt panic rising in her chest. I don't know how to do that. I'm barely helping myself, neither did I. Neither did Grace, but we learned. And you will too. Besides, helping others is sometimes the best way to help yourself. When you give people hope, you remember that hope exists. The train announcement crackled overhead. They would be stopping for lunch soon. A longer break at a bigger station. Their last major stop before Seattle. I need you to think about something, Dorothy said. And I want you to be completely honest with me and with yourself. Okay. When you get to Seattle, what are you going to do? Really do. Not what you think you should do. Not what sounds good. But what does your gut tell you? Rebecca closed her eyes. She let herself feel instead of think. When she stopped arguing with herself, when she stopped trying to be practical or reasonable, what did she actually want? The answer came quietly but clearly. I want to write, she said. Not someday. Not when I have time, now. I want to write the stories that have been living in my head for 15 years, even if they're terrible, even if no one reads them. I need to get them out. Then that's what you'll do. But I need money. I need to eat. I need somewhere to live. So you'll find a job that pays the bills but doesn't consume your soul. Waitressing maybe, or working in a bookstore. Something that leaves you with enough energy to write. It won't be glamorous. But it will be yours. Rebecca opened her eyes. Dorothy was watching her with such kindness, such certainty, like she already knew how this story would end. What if I fail? Then you'll have tried, and that's infinitely better than wondering what if for the rest of your life. The train pulled into the station. People gathered their things, preparing to get off for lunch. Dorothy stood slowly, stretching her back. Come on, she said. Let's get some real food. And then I have one more thing to tell you. The most important thing. Rebecca stood, clutching Grace's journal to her chest. She felt like she was holding something sacred. The weight of all these stories, all these brave choices, all these lives transformed by one person caring enough to say the true thing instead of the easy thing. They stepped off the train into bright afternoon sunshine. And Rebecca felt, for the first time since leaving Chicago, like she might actually be walking towards something real. The station cafe was nothing special. Plastic tables, fluorescent lights, the smell of old grease and burnt coffee. But Dorothy led them there with purpose, choosing a table by the window where they could watch the train. They ordered sandwiches and sat across from each other. Rebecca couldn't stop touching Grace's journal, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. It felt like holding a piece of history, a chain of courage passing from one generation to the next. You're wondering what the most important thing is, Dorothy said, biting into her sandwich. I am. It's about fear and truth, and the stories we tell ourselves. Rebecca waited. She'd learned by now that Dorothy didn't rush. She let ideas unfold at their own pace. When I left my wedding, Dorothy continued, I thought I was running from a bad situation. But I was also running from something deeper, something scarier. What was that? Myself, the real me. The one I'd been hiding since I was a little girl. Dorothy set down her sandwich and looked directly at Rebecca. We all do this, you know. We learn early what's acceptable, what makes people love us, and we build a version of ourselves that fits those expectations. We become really good at being what everyone needs, and we forget who we actually are. Exactly. We forget so completely that we don't even realize we're pretending. It just feels normal. The real us becomes this quiet voice in the background, and we get really good at ignoring it. Rebecca thought about her own life, the choices she'd made, the dreams she'd buried. How many of those decisions had actually been hers? My fiancé wasn't a bad person, Dorothy said. That's what made it so confusing. He was kind, responsible. Everything my father wanted for me. Everything society said I should want. But you didn't love him. I loved the idea of him, the safety he represented, the approval I got from everyone when we were together. But love him? The real him? I didn't even know him. And he didn't know me either. We were both playing roles. That's how it was with David, Rebecca admitted. We were comfortable. We fit together on paper, but we didn't really see each other. Not really, because you weren't really there. You were playing the role of Rebecca the good girlfriend, Rebecca the practical one, Rebecca who doesn't rock the boat. The accuracy of that hit hard. Yeah, that's exactly who I was. Dorothy took a sip of her coffee and made a face. This is terrible coffee. The worst, they both laughed. It felt good to laugh about something simple. So here's the hard truth, Dorothy said, her tone becoming serious again. The one I wish someone had told me earlier. The one I'm telling you now. Rebecca leaned forward. You're going to disappoint people. A lot of people, and you're going to have to be okay with that. I know. You already said, no, I don't think you really understand. It's not just disappointing them once. It's an ongoing thing. Your father is going to keep asking when you're coming back to normal. Friends are going to question your choices. Strangers are going to judge you. And every single time you're going to have to choose yourself anyway. Rebecca felt her stomach knot. That sounds exhausting. It is. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do. Because we're wired to want approval, to want to belong. And choosing yourself often means standing alone. So how do you do it? How do you keep choosing yourself when everyone's disappointed? Dorothy smiled sadly. You remember why you left. You remember that suffocating feeling. You remember that you only get one life and you don't want to reach the end wishing you'd been braver. A family at the next table was arguing about something trivial. The mother looked exhausted. The father looked checked out. The kids were whining about wanting to go back on the train. Rebecca wondered about their story. What dreams had they buried? What roles were they playing? There's something else, Dorothy said. Something harder. Harder than disappointing everyone. Yes, you're going to have to learn to trust yourself. And that's terrifying when you've spent your whole life trusting everyone else's opinions more than your own. I don't even know what trusting myself means. It means when you have a gut feeling about something, you listen. When something doesn't feel right, you don't talk yourself out of that feeling. When you want something, you don't immediately ask yourself if it's reasonable or practical or what other people will think. Rebecca played with her napkin, tearing it into small pieces. My whole life I've asked other people what I should do. Teachers, my dad, David, my boss. I don't know how to just decide things. Then you'll learn, one decision at a time. What if I make wrong choices? You will. Absolutely, you'll make terrible choices. You'll trust the wrong people. You'll waste time on things that don't matter. You'll quit things you should have stuck with and stick with things you should have quit. That's not very encouraging. Dorothy laughed. But here's the thing. Those mistakes will be yours. You'll learn from them. You'll grow. And you won't spend your whole life wondering what if. You'll know. And knowing, even when the answer is that didn't work, is better than wondering forever. A train whistle blew in the distance. Their train. 5 more minutes until they had to board again. I want to tell you about the people who didn't make it, Dorothy said quietly. What do you mean? Over 30 years I've met hundreds of people on this train. People in transition. People running. People searching. And I've kept in touch with many of them. Not all of them made the leap. Not all of them chose themselves. What happened to them? Some went back to their old lives. Convinced themselves they'd overreacted. That change was too scary. That the devil they knew was better than the devil they didn't. And were they okay? Dorothy's expression grew sad. Some were. They found ways to make peace with their choices. But others? I've gotten letters from people 10, 15 years later. Letters filled with regret. People saying, I should have listened. I should have been braver. Now I'm stuck and it's even harder to leave. Rebecca felt cold despite the warm cafe. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand the cost of playing it safe. Yes, choosing yourself is scary. Yes, you'll disappoint people. Yes, you might fail. But staying in a life that's killing you, that has costs too. And those costs compound over time. The train whistle blew again. Closer now. We should go, Rebecca said. 1 more minute. Dorothy reached across the table and took Rebecca's hands. I need you to make me a promise. What kind of promise? When you get to Seattle, I want you to give yourself 6 months. 6 real months where you actually try. Where you find a job that pays the bills but doesn't consume you. Where you write every day even if it's terrible. Where you don't make any decisions based on what other people think you should do. 6 months. Just 6 months. And if after that time you genuinely want to go back to your old life, then fine. At least you'll know. But you have to really try. Not half-heartedly. Not with one foot out the door. Really try. Rebecca felt tears building. I'm scared. Good. Fear means you're doing something that matters. If you weren't scared, this wouldn't mean anything. They stood and gathered their things. Grace's journal felt heavier now, weighed down with all these stories of people who made the leap and people who didn't. Rebecca thought about which category she wanted to be in. Back on the train, they settled into their seats for the final stretch. Washington State rolled by outside the windows, green and lush and rainy, so different from the flat fields of Indiana or the mountains of Montana. Tell me about your husband, Rebecca said. Tom, right? How did you meet him? Dorothy's face lit up. At a photography workshop, actually. 5 years after I moved to Seattle. He was teaching a class on landscape photography. I signed up because I wanted to get better at outdoor shots. And he was terrible at teaching. Brilliant photographer, but awful at explaining things. He'd just gesture vaguely and say, feel the light, which is completely unhelpful when you're trying to learn technical skills. Rebecca laughed. So how did that lead to marriage? After the third class, I stayed behind and told him his teaching method made no sense. I expected him to be offended. Instead, he asked me to help him rewrite his curriculum. We spent 6 months working together, arguing about the best way to explain aperture and shutter speed. And somewhere in all that arguing, we fell in love. That's beautiful. It was unexpected. I wasn't looking for love. I'd convinced myself I was better off alone. But Tom saw me, the real me, not the person I thought I should be. And that was terrifying and wonderful. Did he make you change your plans? Your independence? No, that's how I knew it was real. He had his photography. I had mine. We supported each other without consuming each other. We built a life together without either of us disappearing into it. That's what I want, Rebecca said softly. Not right now, but someday. Someone who sees the real me and loves that person. Not who I pretend to be, and you'll find it. But first you have to know who the real you is. And that takes time. It takes trying things and failing. It takes writing bad stories and good stories. It takes being alone long enough to hear your own voice. The afternoon stretched into evening. They talked about smaller things now. Books they loved. Places they'd traveled. Favorite foods. The kind of comfortable conversation that happens between old friends. As the sun set, Dorothy pulled out her journal one last time. I want to write your story. Like I have with everyone else. Right now. Right now. While it's fresh. While I can still see the hope in your eyes. Rebecca watched Dorothy write. Her handwriting was neat and steady despite her age. Rebecca wondered what words she was choosing. How she would summarize this encounter. What she saw when she looked at Rebecca. When Dorothy finished writing, she showed Rebecca the page. There was Rebecca's name at the top, the date, and a few paragraphs describing their meeting. But what struck Rebecca most was the last line Dorothy had written. She arrived broken and is leaving whole. Not healed. Not fixed. But whole, ready to be broken and remade as many times as it takes to find herself. Rebecca read it twice. 3 times. Is that how you see me? It's how I see everyone brave enough to leave. We're all works in progress. We break and heal and break again. The goal isn't to never break. It's to keep choosing wholeness even when breaking would be easier. Night fell completely now. Outside the window, Rebecca could only see her own reflection. She looked tired, scared. But there was something else there too. Something she hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. We'll reach Seattle in the morning, Dorothy said, closing her journal. Our last night together. I don't want it to end, I know. But it has to. That's the nature of journeys. They have beginnings and endings. What matters is what you do with the middle. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the darkness roll by. Rebecca thought about everything that had happened in 3 days. How a random seat assignment had changed her entire perspective. How one person's kindness had given her permission to be brave. Dorothy, she said quietly, yes, dear? Thank you for sitting next to me. For sharing Grace's story and your story. For caring about a complete stranger. Dorothy smiled. You're not a stranger anymore. You're part of this chain. Part of this legacy of women choosing themselves. And someday you'll pass it forward to someone who needs it. That's how we save each other. One conversation at a time. Rebecca pulled Grace's journal onto her lap and opened it carefully. She read through the entries. All these lives, all these brave choices, all these people who said yes to themselves when everyone else wanted them to say no. Tomorrow, she would join them. Tomorrow, she would step off this train and into her new life. Whatever that looked like. However scary it was, tonight she let herself rest. Let herself be carried forward by steel and motion and the kindness of strangers who weren't strangers at all. Tonight, she was exactly where she needed to be. The final morning arrived with rain. Not the violent kind, but the soft Seattle drizzle that felt more like walking through a cloud than actual weather. Rebecca woke before Dorothy for the first time, watching the gray city emerge from the mist outside the window. This was it. The end of the journey. The beginning of everything else. Dorothy stirred and opened her eyes. For a moment she looked confused, then she smiled. We're here. Almost. Another 30 minutes. They didn't talk much that last half hour. There was too much to say and not enough words. Rebecca kept touching Grace's journal, still not quite believing Dorothy had given it to her. The weight of responsibility felt enormous. How could she possibly continue this tradition? She was barely holding her own life together. The train pulled into King Street Station right on time. Rebecca looked at the platform through the rain-streaked window. People waiting. People leaving. Everyone in motion, everyone with their own story. I don't know how to say goodbye, Rebecca admitted. Dorothy stood slowly, gathering her things. Then don't say goodbye. Say thank you. Say I'll write. Say I'll make you proud. I will write. I promise. I know you will. I can feel it. They stepped off the train together into the cool morning air. The station was busy with people hurrying past, umbrellas bumping, wheels rolling on wet pavement. Rebecca felt paralyzed. She had no plan, no apartment waiting, no job, just a suitcase and a journal and 3 days of conversation that had changed everything. Where will you go first? Dorothy asked. I don't know. Find a hostel maybe, or a cheap hotel. Then start looking for work and writing. Today, I'll start today. Even if I'm sitting in a coffee shop with no idea what I'm doing. Dorothy pulled out her phone. It took her a moment to navigate the screen. I'm texting you my address and phone number. I want you to write to me. Not just once. Regularly. I want to know how you're doing. Rebecca's phone buzzed with the message. She saved the contact immediately. Dorothy Chen, the woman who changed her life. Can I hug you? Rebecca asked. Oh, honey. Come here. They held each other in the middle of the busy station. Rebecca felt Dorothy's thin frame surprisingly strong. She breathed in the smell of lavender tea and old paper and kindness. You're going to be fine, Dorothy whispered. Better than fine. You're going to be extraordinary. I don't feel extraordinary. Nobody does at the beginning. That comes later. They separated. Dorothy's daughter was picking her up. She was already running late, but she stayed a moment longer, looking at Rebecca like she was trying to memorize her face. One last thing, Dorothy said. The hardest part isn't starting. It's continuing. When the excitement fades and reality sets in, when you're tired and broke and wondering if you made a mistake, that's when you'll need to remember this conversation. Remember that feeling suffocated was worse than feeling scared. I'll remember. Good, now go. Start your life. Dorothy turned and walked toward the exit. Rebecca wanted to call her back, to ask 1,000 more questions, to delay this ending. But she didn't. She watched Dorothy disappear into the crowd. Just another older woman in a purple cardigan, carrying the weight of 3 decades of transformed lives. Rebecca stood alone with her suitcase in a city she'd never been to. She should have felt terrified. Instead, she felt awake, like she'd been sleeping for years and had finally opened her eyes. She pulled out her phone and searched for hostels near the station. Found one with availability, booked a bed for a week. It would give her time to figure things out. Time to breathe. The hostel was a 15-minute walk. Rebecca dragged her suitcase through light rain, watching Seattle wake up around her. Coffee shops opening, people in rain jackets walking dogs, street musicians setting up despite the weather. Everything felt vivid and real and alive.